Hello everybody, welcome back to Steven's Fight Show, and in this video we're going to be talking about UFC 276. From the time of this recording, it is about 5 days since UFC 276, and let me just say it was a stacked card. The main card had so many great fighters, entertaining fighters, and fighters that everybody pretty much pays money to see them perform. I mean, we had Sean O'Malley, we had Robbie Lawler, who's an absolute legend, Alex Pereira, who's on the come up right now, Sean Strickland, Volkanovski, Max Holloway, and Israel Adesanya. Even though the main card was stacked with so many good fighters, the result of many of those fights on the main card were a bit disappointing. The Volkanovski versus Max Holloway fight was pretty much, if we're being honest, the main event of the main card. Everybody has been waiting for a third fight between the two of them, and it was pretty much a one-sided beatdown by Volkanovski. And that's the main focus of today's video, the trilogy fight between Volkanovski and Max Holloway. I want to make a separate video talking about Sean O'Malley, and I definitely will make a separate video talking about Israel Adesanya and his potential matchup against Alex Pereira, who got a devastating KO against Sean Strickland. And I will go more in depth about Izzy as a fighter and his career thus far and how he would match up against Alex Pereira. So let's get right into it. So let's talk about Volkanovski. Volkanovski, like I said again, had a dominant performance. And this trilogy between these two were absolutely amazing. I mean, you're talking about two great fighters, two of the best fighters, no doubt about it, in their division, going head to head in their prime for a third time when the first two fights were extremely entertaining. Even though so many fans waited so long for a third fight between these two, Volkanovski got the job done and he made it look pretty much easy. I mean, he looked better than Max Holloway on all levels. I'm talking about speed, footwork, combinations, distance control. His speed was just absolutely on another level. And even though Volkanovski looked noticeably quicker than Max, if you actually watch their first two fights, you can always really tell that Volk is the faster guy. And I'm not saying Max Holloway is a slow guy by any means at all, but he doesn't really have that snap in his strikes like Volk does. Max is more of a volume striker who really does well when he's able to string his punches together and overwhelm his opponents with activity. But he couldn't do that against Volk because Volk was brilliant at controlling distance. I thought Volkanovski did well controlling the distance in this fight, similar to how he did in the first fight. His jab was a lethal weapon in this fight. Every single time Max took a step into range, that jab would always stop Max from closing the distance and forcing him to reset. Not only that, whenever Max would get inside, Volk would always move. He would move his feet, move his head, stay in and out, and he would be defensively responsible for anything that Max throws his way. Anytime Max would step in and throw a combination, Volk would counter to the body, counter around the guard, and the precision on all of those punches are absolutely exceptional. And he would land all these shots with such speed and power that it looked like Max was just not ready for it. There were some things that Max did better than Volk in their last fight that Volk did better in this fight. One of those things were counter punching, timing, and it was significantly better than Holloway in this fight, and it was very effective as well. When Max would miss with his jab, Volk would counter over the top with his right. When Max would step in, he would always get flushed with the jab. He would get hit with the leg kick. In the second fight, if you notice, Max actually caught Volk coming in with an uppercut and a hook many times. I also felt like Volk was also winning the feinting battle as well, drawing out reactions from Max to keep Max guessing and become unpredictable. And he didn't really rely too much on the leg kicks as he did the first two fights. So yeah, all around, I mean, you can only give Volk his flowers. It was a stellar performance, and he got the three-peat like he said. So now let's switch over to Max Holloway. If I'm being honest, as a Holloway fan, there's not really too much to assess about Max's performance because of how great Volkanovski looked. Since Volk was always a step ahead of Max, in my opinion, Max really didn't get to showcase what he could have done. I thought Max kind of underperformed, but there wasn't a lot he could do. I mean, Volk he had him in all areas. And just like in all the other fights, Max was on the front foot trying to close the distance and put the pressure on Volkanovski, but he didn't really do it effectively like he did in the second fight. I felt like there was a lack of body work from Max. I felt like he was always looking for the head. When you watch him try to close the distance, he would always try to aim for the head, but not to the body. And And Max is great at digging to the body. If you watch any of his other fights, whenever he would string any combinations together, he would look for the body. I also felt like he didn't throw enough kicks as well, even though he did throw some in the early rounds, but they didn't really look sharp and snappy. And in the second fight, Max had a lot of success with body kicks, leg kicks, high kicks, and he did throw some, but it didn't produce the same effect. And I don't know why, but in this fight, it felt like Max looked a bit off. And even Joe Rogan was calling it out too. He said it looked like Max's speed was a bit off. And as I was watching the fight, I was also thinking that to myself. I said, why does Max look a bit old? And when I say old, I mean like he looks sluggish. He looks sloppy. And obviously Max Holloway isn't old, right? He's still a young guy. It looked like the shots that he was throwing, the straight punches, the kicks, the knees, everything just looked slop. It looked like there was no speed, no power, no intent. It looks like he was behind on every single thing that he was trying to get going. And it makes people wonder whether or not if all of those great fights where he's been a part of, all those wars that he's been a part of, it makes people wonder whether or not if those fights have caught up to him. Obviously, if you take that many blows as a fighter, it takes a toll on how you perform in the future. You can only praise somebody for their chin as long as you can, but there will come a point where it will all catch up to a fighter. And I don't want to say it has caught up to Max, but it certainly looks like it can head in that direction. But it's just my opinion. Let me know what you guys think. As a Max Holloway fan, even though Max lost the fight, in my opinion, I thought to myself, this is the best way for Max to go out. Before everybody attacks me saying,
oh, how's that the best way to go out? He got dominated. Volkanovski was piecing him up for 5 rounds.
what I mean is that this time, because of the last 2 fights, there were a lot of unanswered questions. Obviously, Max lost the second fight in a close, controversial decision, and a lot of people were gutted for him. So imagine if Max lost the same way again. He lost in a close decision. So instead of the fight being close this time, there was a definitive winner, and it was Volkanovski. And he was better than Max on the night. You can't really say anything but give him his props. So now let's talk about Max Holloway's career as a champion. Now, since Max has officially lost his rivalry against Volkanovski, in a way I feel like it damages his legacy, because at one point Max Holloway fans were trying to push the narrative of him being the greatest featherweight of all time. And if you lose to a guy as great as Volkanovski, obviously there's no shame in losing against Volkanovski. There's no shame to losing to the second pound for pound best fighter in the entire world. But for Max Holloway, it wasn't about being number 2 or number 3 or number 4. It was about being number 1. For him to lose against Volkanovski like that, it sucks to see him kind of lose that image of being the greatest at featherweight. And yes, he lost his fight against Volkanovski, but even if he would have won, win or lose, his career as a champion, as a UFC fighter, has already been cemented in the UFC record books, Hall of Fame, if he was to retire today. From all the countless amazing and iconic fights that Max Holloway has been a part of, and against so many great contenders and champions, he will always be truly looked at as a legend. From 2015 to like 2019, he's had an incredible run. He's fought so many great fighters that are champions today, fighters that were previous champions, fighters that were tough contenders. In all of those fights, he has always put on a show. He not only was a great fighter, but he was so entertaining. Some of those fights were so great, even fights that he lost, those fights were so great that it made people become die-hard Max Holloway fans. And because of that, because of what he has achieved, even though he's not champion today, he will always be a champion in everybody's eyes. And you have to remember, Max didn't have the greatest start in the UFC. He had losses against great fighters like Dustin Poirier, Conor McGregor, and eventually he had to work his way back to being a strong contender and then leading him to become champ. If we're discussing the greatest featherweights of all time, I believe Max Holloway should be top 3 or at least top 5. Anything below that, if I'm being honest, I have a really hard time listening. So let's talk about what's next for both fighters. Volk has obviously expressed interest on moving to 155 to challenge Charles Oliveira for the vacant lightweight title. And even though technically Charles Oliveira is not the champion at 155, I mean, if we're being honest, he's the champion. He just didn't make weight. But going back to the point, Volkanovski certainly believes that there is better competition at 155, and he thinks it would make him quote unquote stay busy. Now, I don't remember the rules on how it works if somebody becomes a double champion. I think from what I remember, I think they can only choose one belt to defend, because if they defend both belts, that means they fight like 4 or 5 times a year. and that's a lot of fighting to be doing in 1 year. So I don't know, somebody remind me on how that works. But like I was saying, I think it's a great move for Volk, because after this performance, he has shown that he is many levels above everybody at 145. When you beat Max Holloway the way you did, outclassing him in so many areas, I think it's just a waste of time for him to defend his title against guys like Yair Rodriguez or Josh Emmett. I think those guys are not even close to the kind of fighter that Volk is. And as for Max, I know I'm being a bit biased when I say this because I'm a Max Holloway fan, but I wouldn't really want to count out Max Holloway being back in contention for another title shot, or maybe even reclaiming the belt, because after he lost his second fight against Volkanovski, he made sure that he put on great performances against guys like Yair Rodriguez and Calvin Kattar to secure that #1 contender spot so he can get a shot again. And he can certainly do that again. Max is only 30 years old, which means he has a few good years left in him. And if Volk does decide to move up to 155, I wouldn't really want to bet against Max Holloway making a run to become champion once again. But that is it, guys. Thank you guys so much for listening to what I have to say. Are you impressed by how good Volkanovski has become? What do you think about Max Holloway as a champion thus far? What do you think is the best move for both fighters heading into the future? Do you believe Alexander Volkanovski can indeed become the double champion? Drop a comment and let me know. And if you guys enjoy fight content that relates to boxing, MMA, kickboxing, anything related to that, make sure you guys subscribe to my YouTube channel down below. I would really appreciate that. And other than that, it's been Steven, signing out. Peace.